What if the man known as Rome's most depraved emperor was actually a victim of history itself? We've all heard the stories about Caligula, the madness, the cruelty, the horse he supposedly made a consul. But what if those were just rumors, spread by powerful people who wanted him gone? We're going to pull back the curtain on the secrets Rome tried to bury, separating the wild legends from the hard facts to find the real story of a reign so shocking, the empire tried to wipe it from existence. The name Caligula, for most people, pretty much means monster, doesn't it? He's the poster boy for tyranny, a madman whose 4-year reign from 37 to 41 AD is remembered as a blur of terror and excess. His story is so wild, it feels more like myth than history. And that's exactly the problem. The juiciest stories about Caligula were all written decades after he was dead, by authors with a serious axe to grind. Historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio had every reason to paint him in the worst possible light. They were part of the senatorial class he loved to humiliate. So today, we're peeling back 2,000 years of propaganda to figure out how a beloved prince became history's most infamous tyrant and ask the big question, who was the real Caligula? Before the monster, there was just Little Boot. Seriously. His real name was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, but as a kid on military campaigns with his dad, the beloved hero Germanicus, the soldiers nicknamed him Caligula, or Little Boots, for the tiny military boots he wore. He was basically the army's mascot. But his childhood was anything but cute. It was soaked in paranoia and tragedy. His father died suddenly and under suspicious circumstances. At the time, his mother Agrippina was convinced he'd been poisoned, on the orders of Emperor Tiberius, though there was never any proof, and many historians today believe Germanicus died of illness. And then came the purge. Caligula watched as his mother and 2 older brothers were arrested for treason and died in exile or prison. As the last surviving son, he was eventually summoned to live with the creepy old emperor on the island of Capri. So, when Tiberius finally died in 37 AD, you can bet Rome celebrated. They hailed the 24-year-old Caligula as a savior. And for a minute there, he was. He freed political prisoners, burned the records of the treason trials, and threw lavish games for everyone. It seemed like the nightmare was over. But it wasn't. The real nightmare was just beginning. Just 7 months in, everything changed. Caligula fell seriously ill. We don't know with what, but when he recovered, the man who came back was different. Ancient writers describe a terrifying transformation. The Golden Prince was gone, replaced by a paranoid and cruel tyrant. And this is where the legend of Mad Caligula really kicks off. The treasury, which had been full, was quickly emptied on absurdly expensive palaces and games. When the cash ran out, he turned on the rich, bringing back the very treason trials he'd promised to end. Senators were hit with fake charges, and their estates were seized to pay for his lifestyle. The stories from this time, mostly from historians like Suetonius, are wild. They accused him of incest with his sisters, and even claimed he turned the imperial palace into a high-class brothel, forcing the wives of prominent men into service. Some accounts say his cruelty was so extreme that, bored at the games, he would order spectators thrown to the lions. But most modern historians see these as hostile rumors rather than proven facts. The one thing that is well attested is that Caligula demanded to be worshipped as a living god, something that truly shocked Roman tradition. And of course, there's the story you've all heard, the one about his horse, Incitatus. Legend says he loved that horse so much, he gave it a marble stable, a jeweled collar, and was planning to make it a consul, the highest office in Rome. That one story has become the go-to symbol of his supposed insanity. These are the dark tales Rome told. But how true are they? All right, this is where we need to separate fact from fiction. That portrait of a madman? It was painted by his enemies, remember? Suetonius, an imperial secretary, and Cassius Dio, a senator, were elite historians writing long after Caligula was dead, both hostile to him and his treatment of Rome's ruling class. So, let's look at the actual charges. First, all that sexual depravity and incest. It makes for a great story, but contemporary critics of Caligula, like Philo and Seneca, never mention it. It's almost certainly slander, a classic Roman political smear tactic. Accuse your enemy of sexual deviance, and you paint their whole reign as corrupt. So, what about the horse, Incitatus? Did he really try to make his horse a consul? Almost no modern historian thinks this was madness. It was a joke, a deeply insulting, satirical joke aimed right at the Senate. He was essentially saying, "You're all so useless. My horse could do your job." It wasn't insanity, it was political theater of the darkest kind. Now, his demand to be worshipped as a god? That part seems to be true, but it might have been less about delusion and more about raw power. By making himself a god, he was trying to create an absolute monarchy, like the kings in the East, and ditch the idea that the emperor was just a first citizen. It was a terrifying power grab for the Roman elite. So, while the wildest stories were probably propaganda, his cruelty was very real. He did execute rivals. He did rule with an iron fist. The real question isn't was he cruel? He was. The real debate, and one that historians still discuss today, is whether he was clinically insane or simply a ruthless autocrat whose enemies twisted his actions into the caricature of madness we know today. You can't declare war on your own power base and expect to survive. By 41 AD, Caligula had burned bridges with everyone that mattered. The Senate he mocked, the rich he bankrupted, and even his own bodyguards, the Praetorian Guard. A conspiracy started, led by an officer named Cassius Chaerea, who was apparently sick of the emperor's insults. On January 24, 41 AD, the conspirators cornered Caligula as he left a theater and stabbed him to death. Their brutality didn't stop there. They also murdered his wife, Milonia Caesonia, and their infant daughter. Ancient sources claim the baby was smashed against a wall, though details from this chaotic event are hard for modern historians to fully confirm. In the chaos, the Senate thought, "This is our chance." They started debating a return to the old Roman Republic. But it was too late. While the senators were talking, the Praetorian Guard was acting. They searched the palace and found Caligula's uncle, the bookish and overlooked Claudius, hiding behind a curtain. They dragged him out and declared him the new emperor. The imperial system was safe. The dream of the Republic was dead. After the assassination, the Senate tried to literally erase Caligula from history. They ordered his statues torn down and his name scraped off of buildings. This was a formal process called damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. They wanted it to be like he never even existed. But, as you can tell, it didn't quite work. Their efforts weren't totally successful. And the great irony is that their campaign to destroy him is exactly what made him immortal. The shocking stories they spread to justify the murder were so memorable, so insane, that they've echoed for 2,000 years. The propaganda ended up being more permanent than any stone inscription. The real story of Caligula is a lesson in how power works, and how history gets written. He probably wasn't the drooling madman of the legends. It's more likely he was an arrogant, traumatized young man handed absolute power, who then went to war with the establishment. In response, they didn't just kill him, they wrote his story, leaving behind a caricature built on hatred. And maybe that's the real secret Rome tried to hide. Not just the story of a terrible emperor, but the simple fact that history is always written by the winners. So, was Caligula truly a monster or a victim of a history written by his enemies? Next time you hear his name, ask yourself, do we really know the truth, or just the propaganda that survived? If this legend made you question what's real, subscribe to Lore and Legends, join the debate below, and keep these forbidden stories alive.